Ace Combat 3 is the Ace Combat that has the most going on. By that specifically, I mean it's the Ace Combat game with the greatest depth and complexity of plot. In fact, I would go as far as to say that Ace Combat 3, while being largely overlooked, is still one of the best Ace Combat games because of how cool its story and setting are. Ace Combat 3 has a ton of stuff going for it that either never shows up again, or if it does come back, comes back weaker or somewhat diluted in later games. Now before I go ahead, I want to make two things completely clear. One, I'm playing the fan-translated version of the original Japanese release, not the gutted, awful local US version. And two, this has full spoilers for Ace Combat 3. Go download a PS1 emulator and the patched English version if you can, or just watch me talk about it if you don't want to do that instead. Now, back when I was a wee lad, I liked a certain subgenre of science fiction called cyberpunk. It's come back to be quite popular recently. Something I always read about and wanted to play through from cyberpunk was the... Now, what is a core? We need to understand a few things about Ace Combat 3's setting in order to get that. See, the thing with Ace Combat 3 is that it is not the grim, trenchcoat, alcoholic, neo-noir cyberpunk. Instead, this setting is far closer to a work that it shares quite a lot with, Ghost in the Shell. This world is not the horrifically polluted, eternally at night, depressing, computerized future. Instead, like Ghost in the Shells, this is a world that has perhaps bitterly, but altogether accepted the sleekly marketed digital corporate existence as basically an integral part of everyday life. This future is one where all political groups and all nations have more or less disintegrated. Why did they disintegrate? Because they were bought in pieces by General Resources, a mega merger of corporations. Literally a zaibatsu in the most actual definition. The only other major power block on the continent of Usia is Newcom, a group that is likewise another corporate power block that has split off from General Resources. Between the two, it's clear that they don't really care about the traditional national idea of space. Their facilities are scattered all over the whole continent, and ironically both their headquarters are even in the same city. In between the two is the UPEO, a supposedly neutral remnant of the new United Nations, a group whose existence is stated to be maintaining peace and preventing outright military conflict, but it's pretty clear that they're being manipulated by both sides as merely a third body that might tip the scale in each other's favor. This is part of the reason why Ace Combat 3 is so exceptionally cool, and what I consider to easily be one of the best cyberpunk games. This is the corporate future. This is a future that is sleekly branded, advertised constantly, but is kind of nightmarish when you really notice some of the stuff that is happening in front of you. And that's why cyberpunk can be great. Don't worry about the moral good and evils of the old world, of how nations rose and fell. This is an amoral, corporate, gray power structure. So now we can get back to the... As old nations are gone, and all those old national wars are gone, now we have nothing but corporate power blocks vying for more and more market share. Instead, private security forces make up entire air wings, and navies include privately owned aircraft carriers as the de facto armed forces. This isn't old, boring war. This is... Now, in most cyberpunk stories, we usually get one small view of these kind of conflicts. The punk part of cyberpunk usually means the protagonist is someone on the bottom rungs of society, usually an outsider. However, here in Ace Combat 3, we get to play as the starring role, and this is why I love it. We get to be at the forefront, as someone on the front lines of this massive cyber conflict using the latest technology, latest jet fighters. Decker can go stick to his smelly dive bars. This complete corporate control and world experience is diffused into every aspect of this game's style. If Ace Combat 2 is where the series style got good, Ace Combat 3 pretty much perfected it. Everything is branded. We see commercials for both megacorps, all news is controlled and can be censored by them. The way we see the story even, it's not just through game windows, we are seeing cyberspace through a corporately branded pair of VR goggles. We hear other characters talk to us through video chat and pre-recorded video messages transmitted through a kind of social media. We watch news updates and shows, and so on, are all fed to us. Television in the physical form is probably gone by this point, so instead we directly surf the datasphere, or as the game calls it, the Electrosphere, whose tunnels we are moving through as we see the world outside of these missions. The use of a fictional world's own existent means of communication to see a story unfold. We're not watching the game screen through dialogue boxes and cutscenes so much as we're experiencing it through the world's own means of telling us that story. We see this in the camera angles that are clearly pulled from surveillance footage, in the news broadcasts that are clearly cut off as if part of a larger podcast. While the later games in the series would for the most part keep up the fidelity and quality of the style, none would ever again match this great in-universe explanation and really format's ability to both make sense of the world and be useful for conveying that information as a video game to us, while not breaking the narrative believability. The commitment to this kind of immersion is something I really adore because it takes so much work, yet when it's done well, is on purpose never noticed but always felt subconsciously. Perhaps, as one of my favorite and specific examples I want to show you, is something I noticed which I cannot tell you how much I love. Already, if you decide to defect over the course of the campaign, your entire fictional operating system is rebooted to your new side. But even further than that obvious change is something that happens every time you start a mission. Now, you're already using these Megacorp's interfaces to basically view your mission orders, but as you're done selecting your aircraft and weapons, something special happens. At the bottom of the screen is the VR interface name and logo. For just a few moments though, on the bottom left side, something shows up. Something I instantly noticed but took a while to kind of mentally process. It's the logo of the company, along with an advertising motto and the freaking signature of the CEO. I mean, come on, how good is that? This is how much commitment to style exists in Ace Combat 3. Of course, in a world where massive corporations own and make everything, of course they own and make the fighter jets and are gonna advertise even inside them as well. It's saying, thank you for buying our product. Thank you for buying our software. I mean, I love it. Now, on the bottom right side of the screen is something equally interesting to world building, namely that the means by which flying jets is done is through direct neural interfacing. The information from the jet's cameras and sensors are fed directly into the pilot, and the pilot then mentally controls the aircraft. This concept is something that many cyberpunk stories have brought up before. This is one of the reasons the planes in this game look so strange. They all lack glass cockpits. It's kind of freaky and a little disturbing to see such a familiar feature of machine be missing. It makes a great visual indicator to say, yeah, times have certainly changed. It also helps to explain the new heads-up display. Unlike former and later Ace Combat games, which tried to go for a semi-realistic HUD, here we see one that is completely branded and stylized. Reflecting the fact that the game now has a full 3D movement system with unrestricted roll and easier looping and twisting, we get many improvements which I think are honestly some of the best visual communicators that the series ever used. In addition to our altimeter's number display, we also have an excellent longitudinal radial circles indicating our pitch. As well, in addition to our speedometer readout, we have something I find very cool, the spinning CD-ROM speed indicator. Without ever needing to read the numbers, you will instantly know if the plane is accelerating or deaccelerating or even just maintaining speed. This design for gameplay is super efficient and of a degree I would honestly expect in a fighting game. Ace Combat 3 also brings up the option to swap out both of your machine gun and missiles for a variety of different options. This is another first in the series. Of particular note as well is the first time I want to mention how missiles and plane behaviors have changed for this title. Compared to Ace Combat 2, Ace Combat 3 gives its planes a hefty amount of momentum, really more than I can say ever really occurs again in the series. Vertical plummets can be very lethal without proper braking and precise control. Turning and rolling are both quite demanding of speed and velocity. Nothing I think embodies this more than the unique space mission, where a full simplified Newtonian physics system is the default movement that you use to get around. I feel as though this is them really experimenting with how to implement the full 3D movement planes can actually perform. I think as the series went on, they increasingly minimized this as they returned to a more arcade sense of responsive movement. In general, Ace Combat has never quite got to this degree again. Knowing how to control speed and handling is a degree more integral and difficult here. Now, while the gun's damage has been slightly more forgivingly increased and its effective range has been bumped up as well, missiles have seen an interesting change. This is a detail I want to come back to for later games as it makes a great marker for the measurements of difference in the series. Missiles in Ace Combat 3 are wonderfully smart, able to home in and very dexterously get kills. They have an ideal zone through which they can start up, and then after which they'll become quite lethal. Knowing how to get this zone to be in the right place where an enemy is positioned inside it is basically the key to destroying air targets as well as ground targets. For bosses with a greater turning ability, you'll need to swap out weapons like to the micro-missiles that have a bit more dexterity in terms of how they can be used. The gameplay is perhaps the roughest section of Ace Combat 3, but even having said that, it's still fine. Most of the issues are so clearly from them figuring out the feel of how real 3D movement air combat should work, and still, it's on the PS1. The visuals, however, are really the peak of that console. The reflections in water, the futuristic cityscapes with their massive domes. There are many locations as well that are just downright cool. The floating mega float, the subterranean geofront with its claustrophobic flying. As well, we get a very cool return of several locations from far into the future. The city of Port Edwards with its elevated highways returns, but now with a future elevated super highway look, possibly for electric scooters. Komona's familiar rocket base has been upgraded as well, this time to be much larger and to have subterranean launch bays. Expo City makes its series debut here, as well as being the HQ of the UPEO and the climactic ending battle site of several routes. Before closing on this first section, I really do want to mention the soundtrack. I mentioned it's an exception to the rule, much like Ace Combat 3 in general, and I really mean it. This whole OST is really quite a dramatic transformation. Gone is the funky Top Gun rock of Ace Combat 2. Instead, this is an entire soundtrack comprised of experimental electronic, techno, and trance music. It's truly, really quite wonderful. Hiroshi Okubo, Tetsukazu Nakanishi, and the other great Namco composers knocked it out of the park. It's wonderfully suited to the game, and as soon as you hear Mind Flow, you know some crazy future cyberpunk business is gonna go down. I know it's taken 3 episodes for me to actually say my first criticism of Ace Combat 7, but let me tell you, the electronic music tracks in that are very weak in comparison. Like so much of Ace Combat 3, it's another thing that is kind of unique in terms of its strength and in the commitment to the style of this particular entry. It's done quite phenomenally well. This is more of a personal preference, but as someone who grew up watching the anime Eureka 7, the association of techno-trance future with its really kind of Apple stylings were something I think both were riding. It's the same wave for both of them. I think Eureka 7 really kind of primed me to this style quite a bit. I mean, the similarities in the vibe of both is quite strong. It's a great anime, really, overall, as a side recommendation. This was, for me, growing up, probably one of the nicestly styled and cool futures that I now know is a fad that has been overturned and has been kind of delegated to the past.
Power for Life, Newcom.
So in the beginning, what did I mean by depth and complexity? Basically, every story in terms of its narrative can be measured by its complexity in terms of how much happens to how many characters, and depth. It's a bit more abstract, but you can basically think of it as how many ideas are presented within the work. How much can one think about what happened and who it happened to? Now, bigger here is not actually better. Bigger works with more depth and complexity demand way more time. Similarly, simple works can kind of be tricky. It's a lot like keeping a bonsai tree. You really need to know how to cut and what to leave in and what to leave out. Now, why am I mentioning all this, you might wonder? Well, in short, because Ace Combat, like a lot of video games, is a series with an interesting struggle around having its core great gameplay, but then experimenting with layering story around it. Now, Air Combat and Ace Combat 2 are more or less over in the simple and sweet zone. They're good, and in a very video game way, really don't need to have anything else layered onto it. It would actually somewhat obstruct just how much you can purely enjoy those games. But as time went on, I think the popularity of single-player narratives taking off really spiked, and these games feel pretty bare bones when you put them next to that, as their campaigns have no real solid story and don't really have any characters beyond just this general military campaign framework as a vehicle for a kind of jet power fantasy. So it's kind of nuts that I can tell you that the next entry in the series, Ace Combat 3, is the polar opposite. In many ways, I feel as though Ace Combat 3, it's a counter-reaction. The idea to just write a great deal and have a large, solid story occupy a significant part of the game. Ace Combat 3 has the most well-rounded characters of any mainline title, and really the most missions covering an expansive branching narrative that's typically found in RPG games. In addition to having a great supporting cast, the central villain, main tritagonist character, and main characters are perhaps easily the best in the series in terms of detail and ideas presented. Each of them has an interesting arc and the core idea that relates back to this kind of relationship of soul and technology. Let's work here from the biggest to smallest. So, outright, the reason the story is so great is the branching path. Branching paths in war games is something unfortunately kind of rare. Being able to see and actually play multiple versions of a conflict is something that's usually present in RTS games, and in terms of Ace Combat, only shows up in 2 of the 7 mainline games. Now what I mean is not an alternate mission that ultimately amounts to the same victory. I mean alternate perspectives as you can personally play through and take on that war. What's more, only in Ace Combat 3 do you get to directly play through all these events, all the way through to 5 different variant endings. The ability to view the larger forces and then play as them, sometimes even against your own actions in the other routes, is not just fun, but something unique to video games as a medium. I feel this really reflects trying to learn about actual wars in real life. There's seldom ever one simple answer or one simple side. You need to see multiple to really get the big picture of why a conflict happened and why it ended as well. Now, my recommended playthrough is the good but slightly weaker Newcom routes, then the general resource routes, which reveal quite a great deal, and then finally probably end with the UPEO route, as it's your satisfying, happy ending. You learn about characters in one route as you fight alongside them, only to have to face them and then shoot them down on a different path. It's really amazing. The animation done by Production IG here really brings the characters to life, and it's quite good. Keith getting betrayed in the general resources route, Cynthia and Fiona's tumultuous family drama as they try to cope with undergoing sublimation. Some of these secondary characters get more time and depth than full main characters do in later games. Now it's time I really want to focus on the central 3 characters. They're all quite strong, and they all present really interesting ideas. Reina Hirose acts as a tritagonist of the game. Having been born with a rare condition that means she can't be exposed to direct sunlight, in a way Reina is a fantastic pilot character idea. A person who cannot even walk outside, but thanks to the use of a full-body neural interface coffin system, can fly. Reina's struggle with having a body that she feels has failed her, yet mind capable of meshing superbly with machines, is fascinating. The determination and singular focus on keeping herself in the air is very reflective of real pilots and their passion, which drives them to do what they do. At the same time, Reina is also the chosen main pilot of the Night Raven, the peak of destructive performance and easily one of the strongest fighter planes in Ace Combat. Here is the dark side of the idea made manifest. Reina is ultimately able to fly, yet she also willingly becomes the main actor in a vehicle of extreme destruction. This tension between needing to keep her wings yet also becoming such a force is really a moral quandary that exists in the real world as well. I mean, it's a great idea. If flying was your only means of freedom in the outside world, what would you do to keep yourself in the air? Now, I've been dancing around him, but it's time to bring up Dijin. Abyssal Dijin is perhaps one of the coolest names, but also probably one of the best villains in Ace Combat. He's exactly a perfect symbol of the central thesis of the game. Dijin is dead, or at least his human body and mind is. The Dijin in the game has been sublimated, or as Ghost in the Shell would say, he is a ghost. He is a copy of the mind and memories of his original, who has now lived on for 10 years since his physical death. Dijin is set up through the game pretty perfectly, with hints of who he is and what he is doing slowly being revealed to the main character. It makes so much sense. As Dijin himself talks about it, the peak of human ability to pilot a jet happens far too soon. Their mind, in turn, filled with experience, is always held back by the youthfulness of their body expiring. So of course, in a future where amoral megacorporations exist, and where even direct mind-machine connections are no longer cutting it, the next step is to remove that limitation, regardless of the ethics. One of the most interesting things about Dijin is the fact that he does not express one side, but we can see multiple different sides of this philosophy develop depending on the series of events. In all timelines, Dijin leads the rebellion of Ouroboros. This rebellion against flesh is made up of many fighter pilots from the megacorporations. These individuals have already pushed themselves so far and want to continue. Perhaps the version of Dijin's philosophy I find most interesting is his very Buddhist approach that the world of flesh is the world of hell. As long as humans are limited to their bodies, then the limitations and needs of those bodies will prevent them from knowing true enlightenment. It will cause conflict and cause suffering. The term that Dijin uses to describe this state of being sublimated and no longer having a physical form, if I caught it correctly, is amata, immortality or specifically deathlessness. Maybe the thing that makes Dijin so great as well is at the same time how sympathetic he is. What becomes clear after several of the routes is that, in a way, he's perhaps seeking revenge against the world of the flesh, of the real. As a confused ghost in the machine, he watched his former body and lover Yoko die in what was likely a corporate espionage attempt. Now after 10 years of flowing through the Electrosphere and pretending to almost be human, his master plan of manipulating the world towards a point where he could get his revenge has occurred. Now unfortunately for Dijin, we as Nemo end up deleting him in every ending, but of course that is the point. Slowly as the story goes on, we start to get the sense that our protagonist is not just a faceless and voiceless entity, and isn't really even human at all. How the Ace Combat games handle their silent protagonist is one of the more interesting points of the series, and unsurprisingly, I think the games that do it better are also the better games in general, without fail. Our being a program with complete access to the Electrosphere also comes around to help explain our interactions in this game. As an omnipresent AI, we see the world through its cameras and through its information flow. Once again, it's a fantastic diegesis of how we as the audience can view and see all the information revealed to us and needed for the story. Sadly, this is also, once more, something later games never really return to. Being able to seamlessly blend our experiences as the character Nemo with our real-life playing of the game to figure out what's going on is something that later games sorely lack. As Nemo, we perhaps go through one of the coolest and most interesting arcs in Ace Combat. Simon, the co-worker and fellow scientist of Yoko, jealous of her infatuation with the original human Dijon, has now been made aware of Dijon's ghost and has created us as an AI out for revenge. So in essence, we get a double revenge story of Dijon wanting to get revenge against the flesh, and the AI, us, Nemo, trying to get revenge against Dijon. As this counter program, as Nemo, after attaining all endings, Simon tells us, quite bluntly, the entire events of Ace Combat 3 were one massive simulation. Now this is where I think I really have to make a point that many others seem to miss. They all at this point dismiss the events of Ace Combat 3, maybe because they also didn't play it, as being just one giant simulation in the kind of it was just a dream sort of dismissal. But I can say quite confidently that these maybe less imaginative folks have missed the point. The corporate war will happen. The real ghost of Abyssal Dijon is alive and working towards his revenge. At the end of the final transmission, Simon purges us as Nemo from the simulation and we are set free into the Electrosphere. When the actual corporate war happens, no matter how it happens, we will be there to end Abyssal Dijon. No matter the outcome of the war, no matter which side Nemo will end up on, one way or another, he will be destroyed. So 15 years before Soma made everyone think about the relation of souls, bodies, and technology really big, Ace Combat 3's central character story within its cyber setting is really one of a girl with an imperfect body but a very capable soul. Dijon, a soul without a body seeking revenge, and we as the player, and essentially a simulation of a soul, trying to get revenge in turn on Dijon. Now if you're wondering why I've spent so long on this, it's because this level of development never really ever returns to the series. We get some still good and bad attempts, but this multifaceted development of character is really unique to this game and its branching timelines. The core gameplay has been renovated a bit, and it's still quite fun. Around that now, the stylish elements are not just enhanced, but very strong. They're always trying to convey the themes and the feel of the world. That world itself is interesting and complex. The plot that takes place in it with its branching paths is dynamic, and it's a great way to experience different vantage points. Within that now as well, the characters all have great arcs and they're all developed. The main core trinity of Rena, Dijon, and Nemo are easily strong enough to warrant 3 entire games focused on them alone, let alone enjoying them all in one. Ace Combat 3 is something I would happily enjoy reading about because of how interesting it is and how much it brings up that humans, but especially fighter pilots as well, have grappled with this kind of trinity of mind, body, and technology. Of all its details, it is the exception in the series because of just how many of these things it gets developed, and on such a scale.